So I'll just start that over real quick. So again, good morning. I'm Sora Stacy Hayes of Iota Alpha Sigma Sorority Incorporated, a chapter of Sigma Gamma Sorority Incorporated, servicing Northern New Jersey. And I am the social action chair for our chapter. And we just wanted to discuss Black fatigue coping in today's America. And we have a few wonderful sorors who decided to join us today. First off, I'd like to welcome Sora Kyra Fryer. She is the owner and lead therapist at Just Speak Freely Therapy. Kyra is a licensed clinical social worker and marriage and family therapist. She graduated from Syracuse University. And let me see, what year was that, Kyra? In 2016. Wow, yeah, so she's kind of a recent grad there. Not too long out into the fray. And we also have Sora Chandrika Cook. She's the CEO of Dear Future Husbands 365, and she owns her own private practice. She's developed a mentor program. Let me just see something. So she does a mentor program fostering education, support, networking, and practicum opportunities for graduate students of color in the counseling field. She has a lot of stuff going on, as you can see from her bio. So please do give it a read over. But she's also been a member of Sigma Gamma Rho sorority for the last 19 years. And I'm sorry, Sora Cook, where did you come in at?
The University of Alabama in 2002.
Wow.
So I am a Southern soror.
I love it. I have a lot of Alabama family. So yes, I do. I love it. Welcome.
Oh my God. Wait a minute.
What's up? Who's talking?
I think someone unmuted by mistake.
Oh, okay. We also will have joining us Sora Beverly Kennedy. She's running a little late, unfortunately. She was doing her good works this morning, so that's why she's running late. But Sora Kennedy joined Sigma Gamma Rho sorority incorporated through Eta Upsilon at Rutgers University, New Brunswick in 1979. And she is currently a member of Iota Alpha Sigma, serving as our Basileus, our wonderful Basileus. And rounding out the panel is Sora Freeman, who has an MSW from Rutgers University and has worked in the field of child protective services for 21 years. Sora has a great passion to help people whenever and however she can. So we definitely welcome her input in our discussion today.
Thank you. Wait, you didn't add that I've been in the organization for 27 years.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And I came in at Stockton University.
Yes,
and she's my line sister. So you think she would have remembered that, Hi, Kara, it's been a long time. Yes.
I know. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Terry, for jumping in on that. Okay, so I just wanted to share a couple of facts to kind of frame our discussion this morning. So according to some Black mental health facts, so according to the Health and Human Services Office of Minority Health, Black adults in the US are more likely than white adults to report persistent symptoms of emotional distress, such as sadness, hopelessness, and feeling like everything is an effort. I know I've been there. I don't know how many of you other ladies have been there, but I'm definitely raising my hand to this one. And despite the needs, only 1 in 3 Black adults who need mental health care receive it. And a lot of, factors go into the reasoning why they don't seek out that help. But according to the American Psychiatric Association, they also are less likely to receive guideline consistent care, less frequently included in research, more likely to use emergency rooms or primary care rather than mental health specialists. I've also been guilty of that, ladies. Over time, anxiety can affect a person's health. So some researchers argue that Black Americans experience weathering. which is a long-term erosion of mental and physical health due to chronic trauma, stress, and racism. Across every age and gender, on average, Black people live shorter lives than white people. And this is something that we definitely need to address and correct. I also wanted to throw out that there is a health crisis right now. In 2018, for the first time in the history of research of this type of research, the rate of suicides for Black children between the ages of 5 and 12 has exceeded that of white children. And more than a third of elementary school aged suicides involved Black children. So we're saying that representation matters. Only 6.2% of psychologists, 5.6% of advanced practice psychiatric nurses, 12.6% of social workers, and 21.3% of psychiatrists are members of minority groups. Now that's minority groups, just not Black groups. That's an insanely underrepresented number. Then we move on to community stigma. In research studies, Black people have indicated that mild depression or anxiety will be viewed as crazy in their social circles. So many of those interviewed also believe that discussions about mental illness would not be appropriate even among family. So that's a very lonely place to kind of be. And some of the barriers to mental health care are socioeconomic disparities, the stigma, just about being personal weakness if you seek help, provider bias and inequity of care. So that's Black people haven't historically been negatively affected by prejudice and discrimination in the healthcare system in the US. And unfortunately, many Black people still have these negative experiences when they attempt to seek treatment, which is why I'm so glad that we have our sisters here representing the Black therapists that are out there and willing and able to help you. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and you can drop your questions or comments in the chat, and our panelists will address them as we go. So if we want to start with Sora Fryer, would you like to make any initial comments on the things that we just kind of went over?
Sure, can you hear me? All right, perfect. Yeah, so I think that essentially everything that's written is, it makes sense. I think for us as Black women, well, for Black people in general, mental health symptoms don't look like the normal, the DSM-5 mental health symptoms, right? Sometimes you might see, someone who can be diagnosed with, I don't know, like children, for instance, diagnosed with ADHD, and essentially it's really, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's happening in the home. They've been experiencing a boatload of trauma for the last couple of years, and that's their symptoms manifesting. But of course, a culturally incompetent clinician, psychologist, doctor, whoever, might diagnose them with ADHD, put them on these medications that don't seem like they're working. So, I think that a lot of times we show up with symptoms that don't necessarily look like the book symptoms. For Black women particularly, we have an even harder time because we're the ones who are carrying the load, right? So not only are we, raising our sons and daughters, but we also have to go out and work. A lot of the times, especially, lately, in single family households, more often than not, the women are the primary provider, right? They're the sole provider. And so they have to go and they have to work. They have to go and raise their children, on top of, going and walking into society, experiencing racism, experiencing sexism, not even getting paid enough to be able to really support their family, right? So there's all of these things that they have to carry. And so that can be really, really, what's what I'm looking for? And so it just impacts the way that we show up with our mental health. And so there's the stigma, right, that for whatever reason, if we go to mental health services, if we seek out therapy, if we, go to a psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever, we are considered weak, we can't handle it. And that's been something that's been ingrained in us since, Jim Crow and beyond, that we're weak and we can't handle it. And the only way to be strong for whatever reason is to not show that we are struggling. And so Black women, we tend to take it on, take everything on because we think we're superwomen, which we are. But the issue comes in when the whole entire weight of the world is on your shoulders and you're struggling silently. And that's when we see, people who go into, let's say, hospitals, or they might complete suicide, because it's a lot. And so there's not enough conversation. So I'm glad we're doing this. There's not enough conversation. There aren't enough spaces for Black women to feel safe and to feel comfortable, to be able to talk about the things they're going through and to normalize that we don't have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders all the time, that it's okay to allow someone to hold our stuff for us. It doesn't make us weak. Doesn't mean that we're crazy. If we're struggling with, depression, or if we're struggling with, someone who's, let's say, passed away, right? If we're struggling with grief, or we're struggling with sadness, or whatever it is, right? It doesn't necessarily make us crazy. If we go out and seek some professional help, it means that we are finally acknowledging that we can't do it on our own, and we're not supposed to. Humans aren't monolithic creatures. We are literally socialized and created to socialize, and created to be amongst other people. So yeah, I think that, clearly all of that is true. And for us as Black women, it's so important for us to be able to normalize what it is that we are going through and find spaces in community to be able to talk about these things, so we know that we're not alone.
Thank you, Sorafry. That is so true. And I guess, it's also trickling down to our children now. And as many of us are mothers, and we're seeing this, this rise in suicide and depression with our kids. And we're, basically struggling to even cope with ourselves, what's going on with our mentality about what's happening in this country as far as racism, on top of our daily, just typical being a woman type of stressors. Yeah, I just feel like it's something that we really need to address. Like they say, when you're in an emergency situation, you need to take care of yourself before you can take care of your child. And I feel like we are at that stage now. And even if we're not feeling completely depressed or down or whatever, that perhaps we should do some sort of mental health, coping techniques, so that we stay healthy ourselves and that we can help our children as well. That's a free forum for anybody to kind of comment on, if you like.
I just wanted to tag on to the last part where you said, being able to help ourselves while we're helping our kids. I think that's so important because, particularly as mothers, right, we do anything for your child. That's your baby. So you try and to, put your child first, and whatever it is that they need, whatever their needs are, you try to meet them. But the reality is, if you are struggling yourself, your kid is a sponge. Your kid is absorbing that. So if you're not helping your own self, if you're not getting the help that you necessarily need, if your child isn't seeing you get the help that you need, well, one, if they're thinking, and so I work with a lot of kids too, right? So when I work with kids, I have a really, really difficult time with some of my kids because the symptoms that they're manifesting are really like mirroring their parents, right? They're seeing their parents, they're seeing what it is that their parents are doing. And so, but the parents don't see that, right? And so when I get with them, they always are like really frustrated because they're like, well, why do I have to be here and my mom doesn't? Or why do I have to be here and my dad doesn't? Right? Like, I'm not crazy. I'm not the one who needs this. You know what I mean? This is really ugly, negative idea of what therapy is, because we've created this narrative that therapy means you're crazy, or therapy means that like you need help, right? When in all actuality, we really do need to check ourselves and get ourselves in a space where we're healthy enough to be able to raise our kids, because healthier adults breed healthy kids. So I just wanted to tap onto that part and just say how important that is to make sure we're doing our own work so that our kids see us doing our own work. It just makes it easier to normalize the idea that everything isn't always okay, and that it is okay to seek out help.
So I just want to tackle the first part when it comes. I'm sorry for the kid in the back. We're on vacation actually. Can y'all hear me? I hope you can. So I want to just talk about what Sora Fire was saying, just the kid, the parents, but also I think we have to realize we're dealing with at least 4 different generations now. And I don't think we realize how those generations are being affected. And so I want to go back to one trauma event that we all have been affected by it. And that was last year with COVID and the racism and things like that. In that moment, we dealt with 4 different generations. We dealt with the generation who was the original civil rights activists who were kids when they did it, right? And then we're dealing with the generation that are usually our parents or some of you all that were the product of those 2 people, or maybe even part of that generation that was actually the ones that were marching, right? And then you're dealing with us, or with me, the generation that was the educated generation. So you're dealing with a generation that was about social justice. You're dealing with a generation that was about establishing a wealth through working, right? A stable job. Then you're dealing with another generation that's all about education. Let's get these degrees. And then you're dealing with the generation, this is the now generation, who we told them was privileged, right? We told them their Black was beautiful. We told them that everything was great. We told them that they were beautiful, that they can do anything. And then the world tells them no. And so here's the thing. You got a generation that didn't get help, that was very much traumatized, right? I'm from the South, hoses, all the things they did, discriminations, being called names, sit-ins, and they were teenagers. If you ever noticed, they were college students, they were high school students, right? So they never got checked in. And then that's passed down to the next generation. Even though they gave them a little bit more advantage, that generation was still dealing with the transfer trauma. And then that generation was dealing with transfer trauma. And then we told this generation, which is my generation, we said, hey, we don't go to council. We're gonna have these conversations. But what we didn't do is check on the first generation. We didn't advocate. So the stigma did not come because of racism alone. The stigma came because we didn't check on this generation that dealt with the trauma directly and then passed it down to these other 3 generations. And so because we didn't do a check-in with the generation who got affected by it the most, when these situations came about, it now triggered this generation. This generation is kind of understanding. This generation is ready to fight. This generation is ready to go to war. Do you understand what I'm saying? So a lot of times what we see with suicide rates is based upon transferred trauma, 1. 2, we see generational unchecked stuff. We didn't check in. If we look at anybody from the civil rights movement and we asked them, hey, did y'all check in with each other? Did y'all make sure y'all was good after the movement? We didn't. It didn't. And that's the reason that stigma come to play, because we was TV said, right? Even though the revolution wasn't televised like it was last year, it said, hey, we're strong. The part of the revolution that was televised showed strength. So to check in on me means that you're telling me I wasn't strong enough to be part of the revolution. And so we see this passed down to generations to generations. The stigma didn't come because we didn't want to be. It's the stigma came because nobody checked in on us. But now y'all want to check in on us. But now we're dealing with the triggers. I hope that makes sense.
That is so profound. It really does. And just the part that just everything that Sora Fryer was saying and what you were saying, it hits on so many levels, right? Especially that generational part. Because from my parents, we started off hearing, well, those words like, well, that's just how it is, right? That's just how it is. And when you question certain things, you were told that's just how it is. And that's just because that's what they were told from their parents. Oh, you can't go in here or you can't do that because that's just how it is. And as you try to break that cycle, it's hard, So I grew up with a father who I sit here and honestly say he did not care for white people at all. Okay. And when he found out that my best friend was biracial, he had a big problem with that. And so we had to slowly introduce him to them, to the family, for him to have an understanding. And I really think that that relationship is what helped to change his view, because he stopped using some of those phrases that he used when he spoke about white people. He started to actually say, before he passed away, that, oh, they're not all like that, but I've come into contact with some that are like that. And that's where that generational thing come in. And I remember, speaking with him about some of the choices that I was making as far as my goals and my career paths. And, his conversation shifted from the time I started college until the time I finished my master's. The conversation really shifted where he seemed to have a better understanding. And if you'd asked me when I was a child, if he'd ever go to therapy or even consider someone going to therapy, I would have told you no. But by the time he passed on, I was very much able to tell you yes, because from the life experiences that I had, and I was able to share that with him, it helped to change his view and have more of an acceptance, right? So yes, I grew up where you didn't go to therapy. If you talk to your parents about it, if you had a church, you talk to your pastor about it, that's as far as it went, and you just had to deal with it, right? And so I'm at this point, in my young age, I like to say to a lot of young women, and I say young women, even my age or younger, when I speak to them and they have some things going on in their lives, because like you said in the beginning, we've all dealt with something, right? I'm quick to say to people, it's okay to not be okay. Right? Because somebody had to tell me that as I went through my challenges. And as you said, what we all went through in starting in 2020, that shifted us all so much, right? It shifted how you are as a person, how you are with your family, how you are with your friends, because we were forced into a situation that we had no control over, and then me, being a person who likes to be in control and losing the control over little things that I had, it affected my household, and I can sit here and honestly and tell you that. And I have children, not a child, I have children and different age ranges. And that overflow that you spoke about, that touched me because I went through that. It's what you're dealing with, then you start to see it in your children, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, I need to shift that. But how many of us can honestly say that we've come across people who was able to do that? And it could be just because of, how I was raised and the experience that I had, that I was able to see it and be able to take a step back and say, I need to change that, because I don't want my child or my children to have to deal with those things on that level, right? And just one other thing I want to touch on, when you spoke about the suicide rate, it's so disheartening to be able to sit here and say that I know people, not a person, people whose children have committed suicide. And when you and I have children that were around the same age when their children committed suicide, that really makes you as a parent sit back and say, what is it that I need to do differently, right, to be able to help? But that transfer of trauma is very real. That whole conversation, with your child, and the reality of it, of when they're in school and the things that they face, they don't always bring it back to you. And some of us were raised where you don't ask a whole lot of questions. You just say, how was your day? Oh, good. Okay, great. Did you do your schoolwork? Okay, good, great. It's just things like that. So it's really, a lot of it is about shifting the conversation and not putting on any blame or anything, but it really about shifting the conversation, that we have, that may help along the way. And that, what they see, they don't see a lot of us in the schools, and then, in the things outside of sports that they would like to do, they don't see a lot of us. And that's where they need to see a lot of us, so that they know that they have something to look forward to. So I'm gonna be quiet just in case somebody else has something to say.
Well, I'm gonna chime in if it's okay, because everybody's talking about shifting. In 2003, there was a book written by a sister called Shifting, but we never paid attention to it because we wasn't really tired. But when George Floyd finally, unfortunately, was killed in front of everybody's eyes, that's when America got hurt. But for people of color, we was tired. Know why we was tired? Because we started with Trayvon, but if we really want to be honest, started with Emmett Till. But we was quiet. We dealt with it. They told us we're gonna be all right. Let's keep moving. Then we had the lynching, and we went through that. We was hurt, but we kept moving on. But when we finally got to George, many of us couldn't deal with it anymore. We was just exhausted, because what are you going to do? We all had our mouths wide open. Are you going to find him guilty? Because when we had Rodney King, everybody said it's on television, it's going to be good, and we're going to get the verdict that we needed. My son and I had a conversation, because as a mother of a son, we always worrying. This is what before everything was with Trayvon. My son, they had a book out, what you need to teach your kids when they're out at night. Will they come home safe? So we was tired, because many mothers didn't sleep until their children came in the door. So tired and exhaustion just didn't begin right now. My sister Sister Cook talked about the generation. Well, I'm gonna go back to Harriet Jacobs, that was a slave who had to live in a crawl space to watch her kids, so she would be around her kids to make sure her kids was okay. That's how far we go back to being exhausted. So when you talk about transference, she went forward. We got to go back a little more generation, because it's in our DNA. It's something we have been through, and we dealing with shifting. We know how to shift, especially women. You go to work, yes, we okay. You come home, if you have a husband, some of us have husbands, some of us don't. I'm one of them, but we have to shift. We shift with, you all right, baby? I know you had a hard time. We shifting with our children. It's gonna be all right. I know your teacher don't understand you, but you keep moving on. We have been shifting so long, nobody ever talked about it until 2003. And then we had Dr. Joy DeGruy, who talked about post-traumatic slave syndrome. All those things was coming up, but we didn't pay attention, except the people who were saying we see it. Those counselors, those teachers, pastors of color that was really saying something is going on. Because when y'all both talked about suicide, we didn't do suicide in the Black community. Life was sacred, because we've been through so much. But as my Sarah stated, we started doing privilege. We wanted our kids to have the best. And sometimes the best wasn't material things. It was the love and the conversations, because we had a lot of conversations. We may not have liked the conversations, but we had conversations. We don't conversate anymore. We give our kids, here's the TV. We give you the biggest TV. Here's your iPad. Here's your phone. But we didn't talk. So I'm going to bring something up, and then I'm going to be quiet, like my Sarah Freeman stated. We are seeing more kids coming out of the pandemic fighting like ever before. When those fathers in Louisiana had to come out and say, oh no, we got to be there after school. There's something going on. I'm working in Irvington, and I'm seeing all these kids fighting, because look, y'all been locked up for 18 months. We are iPad, we talking to each other. When I see you, this fight started 2 years ago before the shutdown, and we're going to keep it going. Our kids miss the social, the emotional part, and we miss the social, emotional part. Sometimes you want to hug somebody. We can't even hug anybody. We got to give the fist. We are touching people. That is our culture. And we can't even touch that much anymore. So we have to touch with our words. So I leave this question so somebody else can answer. What's our love language to each other? Because right now, words are the most powerful thing we have to lift each other up. I call you my Sarah. Do you really see me as your Sarah, or do you see me as your sister? Because I'm supposed to be my sister keeper. So our words powerful enough to bring that love that we missing.
That's good, Soror Beverly. I think I just want to speak on it. So as a Southern soror, I don't know if you all know, us in the South, touching is like our culture. That's a Southern thing, right? Like if you come from the South, We're gonna have conversations with you. We won't even know. You're gonna be like such and such, and hey girl, what you eating? What you got in your basket? That's just us. So not only did this pandemic create a culture shock across the world, but it definitely created a culture shock in our region because we are people oriented. And going back to what Sora Beverly, let's bring it home to us as a sisterhood as we get to a place of 100. What's our vocabulary? You know, what is our love language? I understand that we are a business organization. I know that, right? We all know that as sorors, we are business oriented, business minded. But I think for a sisterhood, we have lost that part, that language that Sora Beverly was talking about. We have not had that language. That has not been our marketing strategy lately when it comes to our sisterhood, which is why we're not having sorors who are now struggling a little bit more with their mental health. And that's why we're having sorors come to a place where we need this space like we're having. We're having this conversation where we need to be free enough and sisterly enough and say, I am my sister's keeper, and know what that looks like, right? A lot of times we say that poem, we say that pledge, we hear it at in new membership presentations, but do they really know what those words mean? And so I think a lot of times what happens is we forget the sisterly part of us and we stick and stay focused on the business part of when there needs to be a balance in vocabulary. And so it starts with you all, right? It starts with us holding each other accountable and saying, you know what, you are my sister. And as my sister, yes, you're a soror first, right? Because that's your membership part. But you're my sister because that's what I pledge my love and my devotion to you, not just this organization. This organization is nothing without its members. And I think we miss that when it comes to us being sorors, when it comes to us being Sigma women, we miss that part. And honestly, that's the part that made me fall in love with Sigma. So the things that made majority of us fall in love with Sigma are the things we're not investing in. And so I'm right. I'm definitely with you, Sora Beverly. We have to check our love language towards each other because if we're not checking our love language, especially since we're in a world where that's the only thing we're able to communicate emotions, feelings, and intimacy, right? Like intimacy, it doesn't have to be romanticized. It can be that friendship intimacy, that sisterly intimacy. And if we're not doing that, then we're gonna always see sorors dealing with grief, dealing with things to the point of suicide, right? Like, let's bring it home. Let's not even look at statistics. Let's look at our sorors. How many sorors do we know that have been in that place of depression to the point of suicide? I know at least 5 off the top of my head, and they don't even live in my chapter, right? They're not even part of where I'm at. These are sorors across the nation. So I think a lot of times we have to get to the place where we stop being so business minded and go back to the foundation of our 7 founders, especially as we get closer to November. If we go back to the foundation of why those 7 women came together, because they saw something that needed to be done and they did it with the language of sisterhood and not just the language of business.
Yeah, and I just want to tack on to that because there are some non-sorors on the call, but when we speak on sorors or sisterhood, that also transcends to your sisterly friendships. Like it's not only for organizations, although it definitely plays that part with us, but there's also your sister friends, the ones who have been there for you through thick and thin, and sometimes we may drop off here and there, but we always come back as a sister, and we embrace one another. But with the stressors and with COVID, it's made all of that more difficult. So yes, Sora Cook, you spoke on that, and I just wanted to let you know that that was excellent, but it also transcends the sisterhood into our sisterly friendships.
Let me just jump in. So, I have a group of friends, and we call each other our faith friends, right? And none of them are in the organization, right? But they are my sisters for life. I can call on them. I can cry on their shoulders. They can cry on mine. There's so much like sisters like my sorority sisters are, there's just as much sisters as if my biological sister. So we lean on each other for support. And that's where, that whole, just having that support system, because when I tell you we support, we have and we continue to support each other, especially during the pandemic, right? Because, most of us have children and homeschooling and the challenges that came with that, just being able to have somebody that I can go to and say, listen, this is hard. I need help. And just having that understanding and knowing that that person can then come back to you with the same, that's where that sisterly love comes in at. And then when you're thinking of, just that whole with your love language and everything, we have, to me, gotten away from normalizing being able to just tell your sisters beyond your biological family, I love you, right? We have to be intentional about that, because sometimes that I love you that you give out to someone is probably the only time that they'll have it, during that day, that week, that month. But normalizing, and I'm trying myself, because I was one of those people that I would end a phone call and be like, okay, goodbye. No, I'm gonna try my best, and I don't do it every time, to end it with, and I love you, at some, because you want people to feel it and know that you cherish them, and that's that encouragement that sometimes it's what that person needs to get them through that day, and you never know what somebody's going through, especially if they don't tell you. So just being able to acknowledge, at different times, I'm here for you. Is everything okay? We just need to normalize that. And that really helps with, with that fatigue that we feel, because life itself is challenging. And then we added on all of these other, stacks of problems that has happened over these last, 19 months we're in now. That really means a lot. So just to have that sisterly connection, sorority sister, friendship, help whomever, but to have that has really helped. I know it's helped me, and I hope that it's helped those that I'm connected to.
I definitely agree with that. I'm sorry, Sir Kennedy.
No, I was just going to say another thing. It would be real good if we begin to be active listeners. I know for many of us in that field, we get it, but if you ever hear a sister, and I'm not even talking about a sorority sister, say, I'm just a single mom, I'm just this, that's when we have to turn around. And you said it, Sarah Freeman and Sarah Cook and Sarah Fryer, is that we have to encourage. Even our children say, well, I'm not going to make it. I have some kids that's in the 8th grade right now, and they're saying they won't believe that they'll make it to 25. Now, I have heard that years ago, and I thought we passed that, but because of what has occurred with the pandemic, it is coming back. So when we hear our kids or our sisters or family say, well, we just not gonna make it, that's when you got to turn on that. And you may be tired, but now you got to turn on the encouragement, because we may lose that next generation, that 6th generation, because they don't believe that they're going to make it because of what they are seeing out in the world right now. The words that are being said. When a sister said, I'm just a single mom, I have to turn around and tell them, you're a whole mom. There's nothing single about you. You got 2 legs, you got 2 arms, because you don't have a man, but you might have a whole being, a higher God. But other than that, you got a village. Now, if we go back culturally, we had a village. Regardless if you had a mother, father, sister, brother, everybody was in your business. And what happens is we start telling people, that's my child. No, that child belongs to the village. We belong in a village where we can love on each other. Yeah, tell me when my stuff stink. I ain't mad if you're going to tell me that I'm stinking, because you're doing it out of love. But we so busy getting ready to say, excuse my language, I watch these shows sometimes, the first thing that's a B. How you gonna call somebody who look like you a B? I don't care if it's in a song, you making some money, and later on you saying it's okay because my baby girls that are 16 or 17 years old are now calling somebody that they supposed to be friends with a B, and they fighting with them. That's my best friend. How you gonna fight with your best friend? That's why I'm saying our village and the world has put words on us so badly that sometimes we got to correct one another. And for when we get correct, don't take it as a criticism, take it as love, because you took the time to love on me. Because I don't know everything. Let me be humble enough to say, you know what, I don't know, you got this. So I'm just saying, as our words and our listening, and as Sarah Cook said, our village, our cultural village. We got to go back to that village, because we let it cross over. No, against what's her name? Hillary Clinton. That's our village. We started our village first. When she came out and said it takes a village, I know I'm a little older than y'all. So y'all know when she was running, she was saying that, everybody was saying in the media, oh, that's beautiful. Guess what? That's our proverb. That came from us. We got to stop letting them take our words. Those are our words. Kuka Chaka Leah, self-determination. Let me shut up. Okay, go ahead.
Look, Sora, can
Come on.
you said that. Come on and preach. Can we pass the collection plate? Okay. Can we go ahead and pass the collection plate? Listen, I think a lot of times this is what we have. We are okay with people stripping from our culture. And that's why we're having increased suicide rates. That's why we're having all these things going on, because we've been stripped. Now, check it. We're the only culture that everybody can strip from. And I mean, I ain't just talking about white, I'm talking about minorities, whites, it doesn't matter. They'll strip us, market it as their own, and then make money off of it. But when we do it, it's a whole nother level of discord. And oh my gosh, here you go again. And so I think when it comes to our suicide rates, when it comes to this negative mentality that we have as a culture, it's because whenever we do rise up, somebody not just knocks us down, they punching us, they kicking us, they slapping us, they gunning us down. And so I always say, when we talk about our culture, I think the fear that we have as a culture came during Black Wall Street. I think Black Wall Street was the draw. And I say that because that's when we were at our best, right? We were making money. We had our own. We weren't bothering nobody. Wasn't nobody bothering us. And when they realized that Black money really does speak, and they say, and this is historical, it's the only time America bombed itself. Y'all, the only time America bombed itself, and don't nobody, somebody threw the rock and everybody hiding their head and don't nobody know what happened. Oh, we don't know. We don't know what happened. And here's the thing, I think that moment just literally was the last straw. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, that didn't allow us to bounce back, because it was no bounce back after that. It was like, man, here we didn't establish our own city. We established our own money, our own banks. We ain't bother nobody. We ain't ask nobody for nothing. And then all of a sudden, y'all bombed us. And I don't think we've ever bounced back from that moment. And because we never bounced back from that moment, it just continued, that trauma continued. And we can see it even as they celebrated the 100 year, and the two survivors that left, they won't even get the reparation. Like, but y'all gonna give us Juneteenth? We don't want, I mean, granted, we appreciate Juneteenth, right? But that ain't what we want. That ain't what we ask for. Do we look at our Asian American brothers and sisters, and guess what? In like a whole 90 days, they got a whole bill. They got all this advocation going on for them about Asian. So what do? Right? And we have to teach minorities that we were the only minorities that didn't get the opportunity to say we're willing to die to be in America. And I think a lot of people don't understand that we didn't get a choice. As a culture, we didn't get a choice. We got told, we got dragged, we got killed, we got drowned. We did not get the choice to say, oh, I'm willing to risk my life to be in America. And we're still dealing with that decision. That says, if we get together too big, they're gonna kill us. So I don't want to put you at risk. I'd rather shoot you myself and put you at risk and growing. And I think that's the thing we don't realize, like, all of this is, of course, like we talked about, transferred trauma, post-traumatic slave syndrome. We have so much trauma that even if we all went to therapy and there were Black therapists available, it still wouldn't be enough because we're looking at almost 1,000 years of trauma. There's no way. So it's either we pick ourselves up and just keep going, and we take on that village mentality, and we stop looking at it as somebody being in our business, and realize that correction creates growth, not just valuing each other. And for those who are in the field, we know tech and tone definitely plays a part in it. And I think a lot of times the reason why we can't say what we need to say, because half of the times we don't know the tech and tone to use as a culture. Half the time we doing this and we doing this, that, culture-wise, we haven't taken our tact and tone. So I think that's a reason. Number two, we haven't created a bounce back mentality from this trauma.
Not only that, but just to add to that, I want to say a lot of the times what you see is other, including white people, but even other minorities who diminish our trauma, who say, oh, it's been this many years already. You guys should be over it. That, that post-slavery traumatic disorder, that doesn't exist. It's all in your head. You're just looking for an excuse, that type of thing. So then we find that some of our sisters and brothers buy into that, and they kind of shove their own trauma to the side because other cultures refuse to, acknowledge our true trauma. And they just feel like it should be over with. Is there any coping, techniques that you guys can offer us if we come in contact with someone who is kind of like in denial because of these other cultures telling us, no, you should be over that by now?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Fire. Go ahead.
Can you just repeat the question so I make sure that I understand what you're saying before I answer?
I apologize. I didn't catch that. Can you say that again?
Can you just repeat the question so I know what you're saying before I answer?
Oh, yeah. So I was just, I'm basically saying because other cultures, even including other minority cultures, are telling us as a people that we should be over our, post-traumatic slavery, post-slavery traumatic, whatever. I'm not sure how to say that, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
But yes, that it's a nothing burger, that we're just using it as an excuse, that type of thing. And I find that some of our sisters and brothers are actually buying into that and saying, oh, we should be over it.
Okay, so ways that we can, you said coping skills to help our brothers and sisters who.
Well, basically for us, maybe not necessarily a coping skill, but, is there a way to respond to something like that, like where you're diminishing our trauma, our collective trauma, and say, no, it exists, it's real, and, this is something that we first need to acknowledge, and then, we need to work on as a people, individually and culturally, collectively, to kind of get through this. But it's still a very real, thing.
Gotcha. So one of the things that I typically like to tell people is I like to think about, and it's not the exact same, but it helps people to kind of put things into context. If you've ever lost a loved one, if you've ever lost someone or something that was really important to you, right? You can't tell me that after 365 days, I can stop crying about my dad. You can't tell me that, right? You can't tell me that, after 3 weeks, I should be ready and, ready to go. I should be over it. You can't tell me that, right? Because there's so many years of relationship, right? There's a lot of love there. There's a lot that comes with that. So when we talk about, post-traumatic slave syndrome, when we talk about generational trauma, when we talk about, all of these things, stigma around mental health, when we talk about all of that, we can't just say, oh, you should be over it by now. It's been X amount of years, because it still perpetuates. It's still alive, You know, these are things that are still happening day in and day out. And these are things that you can see, right? Like you can see that, you know, the school on Dr. Martin Luther King Boulevard does not have the same resources as maybe the school, you know, on the other side of town, right? Like you can see these things. So, you know, again, some of the things that I tell people is I like to liken it to grief and the loss of a loved one, and how there is no time limit, right? There is no time, you know, thing. There's no time frame for you to stop grieving what you've lost. And that's the same exact thing with us. There's no time limit to grieve what it is that we've lost because we're still losing, you know? And even if we weren't still losing, right? Even if today, let's say today, for whatever reason, all systemic racism just stopped, right? Everywhere, in every single aspect of life, racism is dead, right? I'm laughing because that's laughable. But let's just say, right? Even if it's still going to take years on years on years on years on years on years on years to be able to process what we've been through and to be able to find ways to move forward, because that's the next step, right? We still have to find the ways to move forward. But in order to find ways to move forward, we have to acknowledge what's happened, right? They always say admitting it is this first step, right? So you have to acknowledge what's actually happened, and then look at what's happened and figure out how do we move forward. And we can't do that if we're still living in that state, in that space. So yeah, you know, I don't necessarily know how to tell you to tell that to somebody, but it is very much like grief. And I think that that's kind of a basic level that most people understand. Um, Loss of, you know, friendship, loss of job, loss of relationship, loss of, you know, loved one, and being able to kind of liken it to that and helping them to kind of get those types of connections, and then teaching that, hey, these things are still going on, and here are the ways that these things are still going on. Because yeah, you have to be able to see it, right, and understand what is actually happening, in order to not minimize. I hope that makes sense.
So, I'm just gonna add on to what you're saying. So it takes 5 years for real to grieve healthy. So grief is not just death, it's any life-changing event. So it could be good grief, which is getting married, having a baby, getting a new job, starting a new career, whatever. That could be good grief. And then we know grief is death. But what we don't realize is, if I'm grieving my mother, right? And it takes 5 years to grieve my mama. I get a new job, I get married, and let's just say I get pregnant. So that's 3 different grief moments that I experienced, added to the 5 years that I already was experiencing with my mom. So that's 1, 2, 3, that's 15 years added to 5. That's 20 years I just added to my grief moment. So you're telling me that after 500 years of grief, on top of some more life-changing events that have happened, that you want me to get over it? There's no way. I already got 500 years I got to grieve. And every grief moment that I encounter, I add another 5 years to the 500 years that I'm already grieving. If we look back at it, we at 1,500 years. Do y'all understand what I'm saying? Because of this moment. And so when we talk about people who are asking like we should be over it, going back to what Sora Fire said, let's just tell them how it looks like when you grieve healthy. But also calculating those other grief moments that add to the years of the things we were originally grieving. So if I'm already grieving 500 years and I add a whole nother 1,000 years more, right? Then there's no way I can grieve to death, right? Like I'm still grieving even at death because I'm always encountering a new grief moment. Let's talk about the fact that as a sorority, we had to grieve Sora Sandra Bland, right? But then in 2020, we helped Sora grieve for her brother's death, Amari. y'all, do you know that just added to the grief we were already dealing with? And some sorors had even got through another grief because they had experienced more grief trauma. And so when we talk about these other minorities, we have to, like Soror Fire said, get in aspect of grief, because that's universal. That's a universal language, right? Grief is universal, just like music is universal. And so we have to allow them to understand, one, in order to really be in a place to understand this, you got to be an ally. And honestly, every minority, and have to realize that everything that they have is built on the backs of Black people. The Civil Rights Act movement allows LGBTQ to get married, allow all immigrants to come into the country and get a green card. That's Black, right? And so when they have to understand that we're grieving at the fact that you won't even give us credit to the privilege that we gave you based upon our actions, then you don't realize what you got. And so when you make it, be like, this is your history. Your family's ability to come here and establish a business, or to get a green card, or to become an American citizen was based upon the Civil Rights Act, which was based upon the backs of Black. Everything you encounter is Black backed, empowered, right? And so understanding and letting them understand that and acknowledge that, like, so tell me, does your family have a business? Oh, they do. And y'all not originally from America. You're American born, right? Like your family is from, okay. So your family's ability to do that is based upon my ancestors. Because if it wasn't for a Civil Rights Act, your family wouldn't be able to do X, Y, and Z. And so even understanding, and the fact that your family did not acknowledge the actions of my ancestors make it worse. And the fact that your family may have owned some of my ancestors make it even worse. So a lot of times they don't realize, like, there's always a connection to go back to Black. And if you don't allow them to see that through the grief process, or even through the privilege that they have being in America, then it doesn't allow them to see fully America. And that's what you have to let them know. If you really gonna be an American citizen, if you're really gonna dwell in America, you gotta see the whole America and not the America that's market before you that says America is this place of dreams and aspirations and greatness. No, it's built off Black. Everything America is built off some Black. So
Thank you, Sora Cook. I mean, you just took us to school right there. And I appreciate you for it, because yes, it is so true. We are actually at time, guys. So I know this conversation could probably go on all day. I personally loved it. I got some good, nuggets in there. So I do appreciate all of our panelists giving us your time and your energy and your knowledge. And I, offer thanks to all of our guests who came. Yes, so, yes, Ivy, we will try and have a part 2 very soon. Yes, because I think this is something that we actually need. It gives us the forum to, get out some of the things that may be weighing on us right now mentally, and beyond going to therapy, which, I do believe you should do. Reach out to some of you or some of the ladies here. I'm sure they're accepting clients. But even beyond that, getting back to our cultural village, this is kind of, in this post-COVID environment, this kind of gives us credence to be able to do that, in a safe manner. So again, I thank everyone for coming. We will plan another part 2 series, I'm sure. And again, have a great weekend. Happy Halloween for those of you who celebrate, and otherwise have, a great day. Thank you.
thank you, Soror.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you,
Thank you for having
Soror.
me.
Happy birthday, Soror.
Thank you.
Happy birthday,
Yes, happy
Soror.
birthday, Soror.
Happy
Hey.
birthday.
Hey.
Thank you. Let me show y'all what I look like on my birthday.
That's
Oh,
beautiful. Okay.
Right.
Looking beautiful,
love
girl.
y'all.
Looking
Thank you
beautiful.
so much.
Beautiful.
Love it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Oh, look at, did you see that, Teray? Did you see
What?
the curlers?
You know
See,
what?
you was
I
good, but
can't.
you didn't let us see the curlers, girl.
See,
You
you
had
should
it
have
going
been down.
on.
You should have been down.